Especially,
how do you mean?
Well, I mean, it's like, it's very easy to talk about, especially for filmic kind of, critical subtextual writers. All right, this gets you a lot of food. There's a lot to eat here. All right, and so it's easy to really constantly talk about the way, like for instance, the Nazis are making a propaganda movie that's a myth of German heroism, and then the Jews are making their own myth of Jewish heroism and inserting it inside of the movie, and then we're not making a movie that's actually not based on real life, so our movie is a propaganda movie about a propaganda movie about a propaganda movie. Now all those things actually do work, all right? However, I wasn't thinking about that necessarily as I was writing. I actually was following the story for A, B, C, D, and E.
So you didn't have any kinds of textual thoughts at all as you were writing it?
Well, the thing about it, truthfully, the thing about it is, of course I have a few little thoughts like that, but that's random stuff. I mean, subtextual work happens when you let go, and you actually just deal with the surface. The subtext will take care of itself if you are coming from a true place. That's not something you put in. That's something you find. I'll give you a good example about that. When I did Reservoir Dogs, I went to the Sundance Institute for a director's program where I got to shoot a couple scenes. And so I shoot this one scene, and the directors there didn't like my scene at all. They were really rough on me. And
what did they say?
Well, the thing about it was one of the misconnects was they're very creative at Sundance, and their thing is, look, you don't work for us. We kind of work for you. This is about, we picked your material, and we can show it in you. So we want you to get out of this experience what you want to get, which is a really great way to approach artists. Then you do what you want to do, and then they judge it harshly. And so the thing is, I wanted to experiment with long takes. And so I experimented in my first take with tons of long takes, and they were like saying, this isn't how it's done. You have more shots in there than this. But the thing is, though, was it ended up, it opened up a giant discussion, again, in a slightly negative form, a giant discussion about my script in general. And one of the things that one of the research guy goes, one of the directors says, well, have you done your subtext work? And I go, what's that? And he goes, I see. You think because you're the writer, you know everything. But you don't know everything. You now need to do your job as a director and find the subtext. You do not know everything just because you wrote it. I go, wow, I never thought about that before. That could be cool. Okay, let me try that. That's interesting. So I took the script, and I took the scene where Mr. White is bringing Mr. Orange into the warehouse for the first time. We shot, and Mr. Orange is begging for a doctor, and just take me a doctor, but Mr. White can't because he doesn't want him to go to jail. But Mr. Orange, obviously, is a cop, so he knows he won't go to jail. He wants to stop from dying. So I take that scene. Now I figured that, okay, that's a pretty basic scene to do something like that. And so what I did was, I took a piece of paper and I wrote down, okay, what does Mr. White want from this scene above all other things? Then I wrote down, what does Mr. Orange want from this scene above all other things? And then I wrote down, what do I want the viewer to take away from this scene above all other things? Now, it was great choosing such a basic scene, because you would think, well, it's obvious, Mr. Orange is bleeding to death, he wants to go to the hospital. And Mr. White's concerns about that are insignificant to him. But just writing that down on a piece of paper opened up, as anyone who fucks around with diaries knows, opened up all kinds of shit, you know? And then I just couldn't stop writing and writing and writing, and really discovering all this stuff. And the same thing when I did Mr. White's version of it, and then my version of it. And then it was then that I realized I had written a father and son story. That Mr. Orange is the son and Mr. White is the father. And how ironic is it that Mr. White's father figure, Joe, the Lawrence Turney character, He thinks his father figure will save the day. The number one thing he says all the time, wait for Joe, just wait for Joe, wait for Joe to come here, wait for Joe. Well, when Joe comes here, what does Joe do? Immediately want to kill Mr. Orange. All right, so now the son is fighting against his father to save his son. You know, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, I did all that, and that was really interesting, and that was a really neat experiment, and boy, was I glad I did the experiment. But it was like, I never need to do this ever again. Because it's there. I don't want to know when I'm directing that I'm directing a father-son story. It's there. It's there. The experiments show that there was much there. I just don't need to be consciously aware of it.
But see, you bring this up and I have like about 10,000 questions in mind. The first thing that comes to mind is that you're trained as an actor, so in some way you're always writing subtext, aren't you?
Well, here's the thing. Yes and no. I mean, you're being subtext. I mean, part of it is just being. I mean, here's one of the things is, and it's one of the great things about learning how to act first and then taking what you've learned from acting and applying it to writing, is, you know, if you talk to any actor up here that's had any kind of experience, one of the things that they'll tell you is there are these moments that they're looking for where they're not pushing, they're not trying to push the rock up the hill, they're not trying to preordain what's going on, and they're so kind of connected to the role, they're so kind of connected to what's going on, that the character just comes inside them. And every actor will tell you that there are moments when that happens, or, you know, it's for moments, you know, sometimes it can be longer than others, but it doesn't happen that often, but if it happens once, you'll act for the rest of your life, in case it happens again. And in those moments, at that moment, you can't do it wrong. You just can't do it wrong. And you are the character, so anything you do is right. Well, an actor can allow that to happen momentarily whenever it happens. A musician can allow that to happen momentarily whenever it happens, and the rest of the time they have technique to fall back on. A writer, that needs to happen every time they write, or else what the fuck are they writing? That needs to be that real. The character needs to be living and breathing exactly not how you're telling them, but how they need to be and who they are all the time, or else you're writing bullshit. Might as well be writing bullshit.
Except you often act out the stuff you write.
Well, no. Here's the thing, though. I acted out after I wrote it.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, the thing about it is, I mean, when I have the conversation, when I get the two characters talking, or three characters, whoever they are, I get them talking to each other, and then it's just like I'm a court reporter. They're doing all the talking, and I'm just jotting it down. And then I kind of, when I'm done, I perform it out to hear the bad notes, to hear where it's right, to hear where I drift or whatever. And I kind of clean it up from there, and then I'll call up somebody, or if somebody comes over, I grab a victim and I read them the scene. Not to necessarily hear feedback, but to hear it through somebody else's ears, again, to hear more bad notes, or to hear where I may be losing the audience.